It is Wednesday, March 18th, the day after St. Patrick's Day, at 10 a.m., and I am calling to order the regular meeting for the Ottawa City Commission. Could we have a roll call, please, which is done in a modified way today? Could we have the roll call, please?
Oh, sorry. Mayor Wygand, Mayor Pro Tem Kaler,
Present.
Commissioner Crowley,
Present.
Commissioner Skidmore,
Present.
Commissioner Jurgensen.
Present.
Thank you for joining us today. If we were to turn the mic around, you would see that we have appropriately placed our chairs so that individuals are sitting far apart from each other. We appreciate those that are participating on the internet and will participate after this meeting. But thank you for being here. We start every meeting with the Pledge of Allegiance, followed by the invocation, which today will be given by Pastor Dakota Smith of Ottawa Bible Church. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
You may be seated. Thank you all for having me here today. This is the one opportunity where I get to say that I have some sort of authority over a city official. So Mike Skidmore, thank you so much for inviting me here today. Thank you as well to the rest of everyone that's here today and is giving me the floor for a few minutes of time. I'm humbled and I'm honored by it. I've been asked to give just a few words of encouragement to you for around 10 minutes or so, and then I'll close this with prayer. So thank you again for having me. I want to begin by starting with an anecdote with a man named Henry Ford, who we all know as the one who began Ford Motor Company. And I believe it was in 1903, so don't check my history on that. But Henry Ford began his motor company, and they were booming at the seams. They were pumping out Model T Fords like no tomorrow, and he developed an incredible staff and a high amount of employees, and I believe it was in Dearborn, Michigan. But there came a day where one of the main combines at his station broke down, and all work had come to a halt. And everyone was sitting around, employees were sitting around, they had nothing else to do. And Henry Ford brought in one mechanic after another, and they couldn't figure out what was wrong with this combine. Well, finally, he found a man from Germany named Charlie Steinmetz, and Charlie Steinmetz came in, and he started playing around with the combine, and he took a hammer out of his toolbox, and meanwhile, there's all these other mechanics just sitting around and wanting to know what in the world is he going to do. So he actually takes his hammer, and he just taps on the combine just in one place, and he taps on the combine in another place. And then from there, the combine is up and it's running and work continued and everyone's rejoicing. And Charlie Steinmetz was the hero of the day. But nevertheless, he sent Henry Ford a bill for $10,000. And Henry Ford says, "What, $10,000? Can you send me an itemized bill?" So Charlie Steinmetz sent him back an itemized bill, and it says, "Tapping with a hammer, $1. And knowing where to tap, $9,999. Well, the basic question that I want to ask you today is, if God were to speak to us, if God were to speak to our city officials, if God were to speak to us and we'd have humble hearts, where would he tap on our heart to lead us in a time of crisis, such as this time with the season of COVID. May God know exactly where to tap on our hearts is kind of the point. So there's a few things that I want to say. I'm going to give 9 different things that I believe God has laid on my heart, and I want to give them to you as a form of encouragement. See each of these things as somewhat of a fence post. I grew up on an alfalfa ranch in the Sierra Nevada area, and we once had a broken fence post to which mustangs invaded our field. And these fence posts help us to remember the important things in life. So let me begin. The first is we're all fragile. I mean, right now, to date, I looked it up this morning, and there's around 206,000 cases. I believe that's the accurate number of COVID. And then there's also 8,000 deaths. I could be wrong on that number, but then there's also 83,000 recoveries. And nevertheless, it again gives us a picture that we're all fragile. Psalm 103, verses 15 and 16 says this, "As for man, his days are like grass. As a flower of the field, so he flourishes. Yet when the wind has passed over it, it is no more, and its place acknowledges it no longer. But the loving kindness of the Lord is from everlasting to everlasting." Also, Psalm 90, verse 12 tells us, "Lord, teach us to number our days." And the Bible says elsewhere that our days are actually numbered before God. He knows our first day on earth. He knows our last day on earth. Now that's comforting because nothing escapes his eye. But it does mean that we're all fragile. Second, we're all equal to the extent that this virus doesn't discriminate. It doesn't matter ethnicity. It doesn't matter national boundaries or borders or anything of that nature. It discriminates against no one. Third, we have this sense of a loss of control. You know, I mean, if we were to think about our daily living, there's so many things in our culture today where we feel as if we can be more in control, more advanced by the day. I can work out better, I can eat better, I can go through drive-thrus, I can go to the grocery store and have an abundance, at least most of the time. But really our life has this illusion of control until something like this takes place, and now that's just an illusion. That bubble becomes popped. So let us remember that we're ultimately not in control. Finally, number 4, there's a pain that we all share from exclusion. Sitting inside our house and having to exclude ourselves from the daily population and from our daily relationships, to be broken from our daily rhythms of life, that's actually a difficult thing. One can go stir crazy, especially for me and my wife. We have 3 little ones at home, a 4-year-old, a 2-year-old, and a 1-year-old, and that makes life somewhat difficult. Let us also remember that there's a difference between responding with fear versus faith. If we're all like a sponge, what happens when we get squeezed? I mean, what comes out of us? Fear, anxiety, self-preservation, or faith, hope, and love? When we get squeezed, it really tells us what's within us. It's really an eye-opener on what's within us, what we're really made of. Next is there's so much vanity in what we do. And in a time like this, isn't that realized more than ever? I miss March Madness, and I miss basketball, and I miss all the sports. I mean, I'm a sports junkie. But this time has taught me, man, there's so much that I do that's really in vain. And it's actually helped me as a father and as a husband to invest in my children and to invest in my wife more, just to kind of restart, to re-energize, to refresh that mindset that people are important. And there's things in life that are way more important than the vain things we give attention to. Let us also remember our ultimate hope. A question that I wrote down is this: the ultimate question is not what do you have or what do we have in the face of the coronavirus. I actually think that's an unfitting question at the end of the day. And if I can speak humbly, if you'll give me the liberty to, with my Christian convictions, I'd like to say this. There's another virus called SIN 100, where sin is the virus that affects 100% of people. There's no perfect person on the face of the planet. And we're all humbled by our mistakes and our need for a Savior. And what I love about Jesus is Jesus came and he said, I'm the way, the truth, and the life. And no one comes to the Father but through me. He was making an absolute truth statement in that time. He was claiming to give life in the face of death. Jesus said in John 11, 25 and 26, he said, I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me will live, even though he die. And whoever lives by believing in me will never die. Do you believe this? There's an old statement that goes like this: either Jesus was a liar, he was a lunatic, or he really is the Lord. And I believe that Jesus is the Lord of all, and he can save from any sickness, any disease. He can even save from physical death. As a Christian, I believe that Jesus rose from the dead 3 days later because the Father saw no sin in him. He was not deserving of death. He committed no sin. And if the Father was able to raise Jesus from the dead because there was no sin in him, what does that mean for us who place our trust in Jesus? And we're hidden in Christ, and we're seen as completely pure and forgiven and loved by God. Think about it. He raises us too, to where there's no fear in death. So as a Christian, I absolutely have no fear of death. I don't want to die. Ultimately, death will have victory over each of us. But ultimately, I can know that there's eternal life. I have a much greater hope than the troubles of this life. And it's because of the love of God, and it's because God values every human life. If it's not God who values human life, then we ourselves are left to value human life, to which, based upon somebody else's differing definition, now we're only limitedly valuable before another. But if God places objective 100% value, then he can define our worth before him, and he can infuse in us a love for other people. To my city of Ottawa, I just moved here from Phoenix. So this is definitely a different environment, but I love it here. And I was in tears the other day just praying because this is my city. I love the people here. Regardless of their beliefs, regardless of who they are, God has given me an infused love for the people of Ottawa. And I just want to encourage you to see the same way. If you'll look to Jesus, then you'll find in yourself this ability to agree with his definition of people's value. And that love of God will encourage you to lead his people. Finally, this brings in us a time where we have a need for prayer. For employees, I was at the corner market the other day, and I was so encouraged that those employees showed up to work, and they worked hard, and they had a smile on at that. That was amazing. Also for our first responders, those in the fire department, the police force, those in the hospital, we need to consider them and think of them in this time. For you all, thank you so much for your humble leadership, your servant leadership, and for inviting me here today, but also leading our community. Also be in prayer for our president, the elderly, the young, and to pray for mercy in this time, that there would be some type of vaccination or some type of remedy for what's taking place. And may God give us wisdom in this time and this season. When we get squeezed, may what comes out of us be the best. So if you will, bow your heads with me. Pray with me one last time. Thank you for your patience today. God, I thank you for hope in your Son. I thank you so much for the ability to speak of you, but also speak of your love. I thank you so much for our city officials, and I thank you, God, for this trial and this season. I thank you for this trial because it will bring out the best in Ottawa. I pray that we would do everything we can to love people, to ask how people are doing, to be cognizant and aware of the status of other people. And I pray, Lord, that we would invest in other people rather than preserving ourselves. God, we ask you for wisdom, and we thank you that if we ask for wisdom, you'll give it. And I pray that in Jesus' name. Amen. Thank you, team. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Pastor Smith. We appreciate your comforting words this Wednesday. Thank you. That moves us on to the consent agenda, which is the approval of the entire agenda. Is there a motion to do so?
I'll make that motion.
Is there a second?
I'll second that.
It's been moved and seconded that we approve the consent agenda. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, same sign. Motion carries. That moves us on to a period in our agenda in which we allow public comment. As many of you know, our public is limited today, so I'm going to not read the paragraph, but know that in the future, once we have come on the other side of this, that we certainly welcome the public to return back to our meetings and to continue to participate online and to reach out to us with concerns you may have or questions you may have. Next is our declaration. At this time, I'd like to give our commissioners a chance to declare any conflict or communication that they may have had that would influence their ability to consider today's issues impartially. Commissioners? Seeing none, we will move forward. That brings us to item 9.
Commissioners, this is a request for approval of ordinance amending Article 4, subdivision design standards of subdivision regulations of municipal code.
Thank you, City Manager Neinstedt. We appreciate you reading that today. So item 9 contains, under the comments, it contains, the Planning Commission has reviewed the proposed amendments and held a public hearing. The amendment changes the minimum diameter of a cul-de-sac from 70 feet to 80 feet, not including curb and gutter. Staff and the Planning Commission recommend approval of this amendment. Today, we will have Chief Matthias and Wendy Lee discuss this item. Mrs. Lee.
Good morning. Actually, the chief is going to take number 10. I'm going to take number 9, but they are related, so we will say that for the benefit of the public. At the this began with the fire department making a request of the planning department to consider amending our subdivision regulations relative to the diameter of cul-de-sacs. And so this has been an item that's been on our work list for some time, and we finally had an opportunity to call a hearing. It really worked out well because we could have it coincide with the adoption of the fire code, which is the item that Chief Matthias will address. So we held a public hearing. We continued it a couple of times, so we gave plenty of opportunity for people to make comments. The chief addressed the Planning Commission multiple times. We did have some people contact staff or planning commissioners. We discussed things. We really varied this from either going to 80 all the way up to 96 or more, depending on the kinds of things that we were considering. And where we finally resulted for a recommendation to you was that it would be a minimum of 80. We want people to know that there could be applications where the minimum would be directed by the chief and it might be larger. But there could be applications where the typical cul-de-sac that we've seen in the past isn't what we do next time. There are other alternatives. And so we will, as we do with any subdivision, move forward, clearly communicating to the public what we expect to see, but then working with each of those applicants as needed to try and work with their actual layout and the number of houses or the number of buildings. Certainly if it was a longer road with a series of multifamily structures around it, you might see that would actually be a larger minimum that we would request as staff. But this sets the bottom number at 80, and then from there we would look at it specifically.
Commissioners, do you have questions for Mrs. Lee?
For clarification, the 80 is without parking,
The 80 is without parking.
and then with parking would be?
Larger.
Okay.
Typically when and I did say this on Monday, but I'll be happy to say it again, when I asked Sarah in our office to put different size circles on the end of our existing cul-de-sacs. When you make them a little larger, a couple of things could happen. You could end up with an island in the middle. You could end up with parking in the middle. But in order for the circular movement of those larger fire trucks, really the outside area needs to be clear. And there are some alternatives in that we could work on with parking. But the other thing it does is as those units move out, if you look at a typical cul-de-sac lot, they're very narrow on the part that abuts the street, and they're very wide at the back. This would probably move the units out a little bit, but that gives them actually more space at the front of their lot to accommodate parking as well. So I think that this will work out just fine. We'll explore with it. And for the sake of the community, if you live on a narrow road and you're concerned, we have alternatives over time if we determine that we need to do something else. The minimum right-of-way dedication stays the same at this point, and it would too, which is 100, which is what we have on the other older cul-de-sacs too. So if we determine that because of equipment and et cetera, that we need those to change at some point, we still have that ability to do.
Madam Mayor,
Yes,
I move to
Commissioner.
approve the ordinance as described in item 9 of the agenda.
There's a motion by Commissioner Jorgensen to move the approval of the ordinance listed in item 9. Is there a second?
I'll second that.
It's been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion?
I just might add, we're not just a flippant decision on doing this, and part of this maybe relates to item number 10, but there's a safety factor when we talk about the size of our fire trucks being able to navigate in this area, and if there's a fire in that area, we certainly want to be able to get our equipment to the fire quickly and safely. So it is a safety concern that we're doing this.
Yeah, I might want to, I agree with what Commissioner Skidmore is saying, and I do have a quick question for our chief. What is the maximum space in which you need for the largest engine to safely turn around that you know of now?
So on our engines, well, good morning.
Good morning.
Our engines turn around in about 68 feet, but our ladder truck, our 100-foot platform is 96 feet. And, you know, the question was, came up, you know, would you take that truck down into a cul-de-sac, the ladder truck? I can't say for 100% we wouldn't. You know, we've had it where it was the first truck out, so it would go anywhere in town. So we just can't say that we would never take it down there. And along with the fire code, just emergency vehicles, you know, this is really geared toward all emergency vehicles. Yes, we're the largest ones, but you know, the medic units need to get down in there and turn around. Law enforcement needs to get down there and turn around. So it really is a bottleneck, you know, once we get down into those streets, your street, you know, we get backed up with emergency vehicles, you know, we're kind of stuck. So this does make a huge difference in be able to get out. So
I might want to say that, as I don't think I needed to declare this, but I've had individuals from the Ottawa Fire Department come out and assist me in changing some light, or some batteries in my smoke detector, and they brought their big truck, and it is quite interesting to watch them turn around in my cul-de-sac that I live in. So I do appreciate that it's probably tough. I appreciate your drivers trying to just maneuver it, and it's not an emergency in which they're showing up at my home. So I do appreciate that, and yes, it is a public safety particular issue, so that's my only discussion item. Is there other discussion? If not, we will proceed to vote.
Commissioner Skidmore,
Yes.
Commissioner Jurgensen,
Yes.
Commissioner Crowley,
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Kaler.
And I vote yes, motion carries. That moves us on to item 10.
Request for approval of ordinance amending Chapter 9, Article 1, or L? Is it one of them? No, Article. Pardon? Anyway, Article 1 of the Municipal Code and adopting the International Fire Code.
Staff will review the changes to this ordinance, and I believe that Chief Matthias will be addressing this matter today.
yeah, so this takes every 3 years a new code comes out, and for us, we've through history we've adopted every 6 years. 3 years is just you're kind of getting into the groove, and then you change it up again. There is a considerable amount of money spent on all the codes, books, and everything that needs to happen when you update a code. So we've looked through this from front to back on the codes. Yes, there are some changes. There's nothing really out there that's going to be a drastic change. They move up with technology. For instance, if you had a fire alarm in your business or home, in your business, you could not use a cellular device for your main telephone line. You had to have a landline. Landlines tend to be a little bit more expensive, so the code looked at it and said, yeah, we're going to go with a cellular phone line. And so that actually has been a talking point for quite some years at the fire service level here in Ottawa. I've had many people say, you know, when are we going to go to the cell phones? And so it's after today, if you adopt the code, we will start moving that way. But that's just one example of many changes that aren't real huge, but it can make it a little bit easier on our citizens. So.
Do we have questions for Chief Matthias on this request? Chief, I wonder if, I know that you were saying that you adopt a new fire ordinance every 6 years, but they come out every 3 years, so we are adopting the newest version?
Yeah, so 2018 is the newest version. Of course, it came out last year. We've always done that. We've always kind of let it set for a year just to make sure that, to get the kinks out of it. And there will be some updates to it, and there will be some changes, just like anything. It's fairly fluid, but yeah, we typically go a year after it's been issued. So.
Madam Mayor,
Yes.
I move to
Commissioner.
approve the ordinance as described in item 10 of our agenda.
Is there a second?
I'll second that.
It's been moved and seconded that we approve the municipal code and adoption of the International Fire Code. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, we will proceed to vote.
Commissioner Jurgensen,
Yes.
Commissioner Crowley,
Yes.
Commissioner Skidmore,
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Kaler.
And I vote yes, motion carries.
Thank you.
Thank you. That moves us on to item 11 on the agenda.
Request for approval of exception request from Lincoln Mobile Home Park / Clear Creek Estates.
This request is related to housing needs for the Southern Star Gas Line project. This request is to allow mobile camping location for campers / RVs in the mobile home park. I believe Mrs. Lee will be addressing this matter today.
As we discussed on Monday, again, the Southern Star's doing a very large project in Franklin and Anderson County, and it results in, for a period of time, 300 to 400 workers coming to our area to install, replace a major line. A number of those folks have made arrangements for housing, and they can be anything from rentals to motel rooms, but some of them have, they travel with their construction company by RV or camper. There are limited RV and camper spaces in these two counties, and in particular, there's none inside the city of Ottawa. And so this mobile home park owner reached out and asked, would we consider something? And I said, well, if you can write up something that kind of describes that you'll be responsible for any kinds of behavior, nuisances, et cetera, that result, and we will take a look anyway. As it happens, this site is located in a floodplain. When we talked with the people from the state of Kansas, they said that's actually allowed, but there are some caveats. The utility connections need to be per FEMA regulations. So while we were feeling very comfortable that this was a great location from the utility connection point, it may require and probably will require some upgrades relative to making sure that the service is appropriate for the kind of thing that would need to connect and that it's flood proofed. In addition, because it's relative to a flood area, there has to be provisions for both the park owner and the renters of those lots to remove that unit should we be issued in the situation where we're at a flood watch or we're warning or we're experiencing flooding. And so I've communicated back with the owner about the kinds of things that they may want to use that are kind of independent of any local person. So it's not when I think it might get to a certain level, but when either meteorologically they've issued an alert or because of elevations that actually are monitored on some state websites. So we're working with them to work that out. I've got a draft agreement already, but it addresses those kinds of things as well as restoration of the site, et cetera. So we are working on that. Would just like to ask your approval for the exception that we then issue a letter of agreement about that.
Questions for Mrs. Lee regarding this request?
So that, you say we're still trying to work it out. If there is a pending flood, do we have some higher ground to tell these people where to go if they're mobile units?
The owner would have to find a
Find
location
something, I mean, even in the
for them to go.
Possibly in the north end of their lots would just
Yes,
temporary.
they could do that, or they could
park.
just find, they just happen to be right near Rock Creek at this location.
Yeah.
And that there are plenty of locations where they could move them. Mostly what it would be is, here we're gonna give you this 10, 12-hour warning that we're approaching this, and then an order to get out, and then a provision for if that person doesn't come, that the owner of the park will be responsible to have those vehicles towed.
Okay.
So those are the kinds of things that we're asking them to give us just their plan for it, and we'll work through it. We hope we've had all our flooding for the next
That's
so many years.
lifetime.
But we are trying to be prepared, and we would ask anybody to be that way. I
Yeah.
will say that one of the things that happens if we don't do this is that we could actually have people finding lots around rural areas that could actually be a bigger hazard with no way of knowing and notifying people. So while this is an exception, We think it's an appropriate one and are supportive of it. We do believe that, meanwhile, we will be looking at our regulations relative to recreational vehicles and campers to see if our regulations are up to date, the newest and best way to look at those kinds of things. Because it certainly can be a good economic thing for us as well. When you have something like this, there's a short-term opportunity for gain in your restaurants and your retail, and we want to be able to support that as well.
That's what I was going to say. I'm really glad to see the people come into our community. Hopefully, our restaurants will be open and used by the time they get here. But with that said, I'll certainly vote in favor of item number 11 on our agenda.
I'll second that.
So there's been a motion and a second to approve the exception for Lincoln Mobile Home Park. Is there any discussion? For clarification, Mrs. Lee, this is a temporary location from April to September, correct?
Right.
Of this year?
Yes, that's right. Although Commissioner Jorgensen did say to us on Monday that he wanted us to have a provision for add-on, and so I did in the agreement say that a 30-day extension could be requested if there were weather issues and et cetera.
But it's not permanent. We
It
shouldn't.
is not permanent.
And then we discussed in study session, I believe, was it 14?
A maximum of 14 of these units with a maximum of 31 units on the site per their original plan.
Okay, perfect. Is there any other discussion? All right, then we will proceed to vote.
Commissioner Crowley,
Yes.
Commissioner Skidmore,
Yes.
Commissioner Jurgensen,
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Kaler.
And I vote yes, motion carries. That moves us on to, thank you, Mrs. Lee, and stay up there if you would. That moves us on to item 12 on our agenda.
Request for approval to add 3 residential and 2 commercial properties to the Neighborhood Revitalization Program.
All properties are within the established Neighborhood Revitalization District. Addresses are 224 South Willow, 838 South Oak, 534 South Willow, 309 South Hickory, and 117 North Main. Mrs. Lee.
Good morning. This is a fairly routine item for business, but we continue to take applications and are excited about the interest in this incentive and the opportunity to do both new construction, which is what's happening at 224 South Willow, as well as remodeling, which is happening at the other 2 residential and the 2 commercial, because it is a good way to incentivize good redevelopment in our community. And so those residential structures, as you know, when you made the change last year, are eligible for 10 years of a 95% maximum rebate. The residential, the commercials have 5 years of 100% and then 5 years where it declines from 50% down to 10%. We have additional applications and we'll be down again soon, but we would put these forward for approval. As you know, if the project doesn't move forward or does not hit its minimum thresholds for the actual rebate, they wouldn't be awarded them. So it is dependent on the outcome of the work and compliance with all the other regulations that we have. But we do believe that from the review that they would be eligible.
Mrs. Lee, you had indicated at study session that many of these properties, probably individuals, if they are driving by, they've probably already seen work done on these properties. So it's not, it's kind of exciting to see things happening and to see their addresses. Is that correct?
Right. Oftentimes, the applicant will make their application for neighborhood revitalization at the same time as they make their building permit application. They're not hinged on each other. You do have to have a building permit to be eligible. But there's a process that goes through for the neighborhood revitalization, which includes some staff time as well as input from one person from each of the elected bodies. That takes a few weeks longer, and so sometimes work could already be going on. It really depends on the person. If they really want to wait to be sure that they would be approved for the incentive, then they can wait. But some of them feel confident enough to go forward without waiting for formal approval by each of the bodies.
Thank you. Is there, I would entertain a motion if there is one.
I'll make that motion.
I'll second that.
There's been a motion and a second to approve the neighborhood revitalization addresses, 2 residential and 3 residential and 2 commercial properties. Is there any other discussion?
If I may, I'd really like to commend this revitalization program. I've used it myself personally, but one of the things I've really seen is that we've listed a couple properties, and the people that are looking at those properties are actually out of towners. This actually helps bring other city citizens, unfortunately for them, to our town, and I think that's helping grow our population, like a few of the citizens around here said that we haven't been able to do for quite some time. So I think this is really beneficial for our town.
Certainly exciting. Any other discussion? If not, we will proceed to vote.
Commissioner Crowley,
Yes.
Commissioner Skidmore,
Yes.
Commissioner Jurgensen,
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Kaler.
And I vote yes, motion carries. That moves us on to report by the city manager. So our city manager's going to change his hat, and he's going to put on his city manager hat. We're so glad to have you here today. Thank you, city manager.
Oh, I'm
Nice.
happy to be here, Commissioners. So I'm happy to have you here, too. So I have several things I just want to kind of go over this morning. This is the new normal. As you told the public, the room is set up different. We tried to give you some distance from each other. No, this is not like Congress where that's a whole different sort of distancing, but this is just social distancing, trying to practice what we're told by medical experts to do. We are doing internally a lot of video conferencing. We're doing we've done our staff meeting by that. We are actually video conferencing at least once a day and talking about the COVID-19 situation in the community, in departments, and doing that. I would also say that we recognize that these can be challenging for our citizens that might normally attend a meeting, that might normally want to visit with you. So we are developing, IT is developing a special email to deal with agenda issues that people want to comment with you on. And as always, I would remind all citizens that your emails are public, and they can email you at any time. They can reach you on social media. They can email any staff. And just because we're in a period of social distancing doesn't mean that we don't need comments from the public. In fact, we need them more now than ever, would be my spin on it. Watch your social media. I know this is going to be hard to believe because Abraham Lincoln said that anything that's on the internet is true, but only go to sites that we know are experts. And I mean Franklin County. Franklin County has a COVID-19 site. They're doing an excellent job of keeping it updated for all Franklin County residents. You'll find information from the Franklin County Health Department there. You'll find information from the National Institute of Health. You'll find it from CDC. You will find it from respected medical professionals and experts about how we work our way through this situation, and we flatten. And flattening is important. And I will circle back around to that. As you know, the governor issued a couple of executive orders the other day, the one that affects us the most. The KCC had originally issued an order to all those utilities under their jurisdiction that there would be no disconnects until May 15th. The governor issued an executive order that applied that to everybody else that wasn't under the KCC, and that includes us. So what that means is this: you still have to pay your bill, okay? We will not disconnect you until at least May 15th, or there's a modification in that order. There are many different ways you can pay. There's a drop box. There you can pay online. You can have it come out of your checking account. And we are still taking walk-in business, although we really would like to have that as a last resort, not only for the citizens' protection, but for the protection of our employees also. So you still have to pay your bill, and it is in the best interest that if you were scheduled for a disconnect, to continue to pay something on that bill so that when the day comes that disconnects are authorized, that you won't have a big amount. And we will work with people when we get to that date, but it is important that people realize the more that are in that sort of position for whatever reason, it helps to continue to pay something on the bill. And if you want to talk to us about that, we've listed the phone number on our website. We've listed an email. The sooner, even in the normal course of events, we tell our customers, the sooner you talk to us, the sooner we can help you and come to an arrangement. So, travel. Lawrence Journal-World this morning has a couple of interesting things. They're closing City Hall up in Lawrence. I'll get to that in a little bit. But first case of virus reported in county. Patient had recently traveled from Florida. And this is a person, involves a man, not over 60, but in their 20s, all right? So there are a lot of people in our community that are still going on spring break. They have gone on spring break. It affects your businesses. It affects our business. It affects our community. We're taking a look at this. There may be some extra steps if our employees have gone to these sites on spring break and we see that. We're talking to our legal experts. We're talking to our medical experts. But there may be a couple of extra steps before people come back to work. And I would say this to the entire community. This is not just about you, but anybody can be a carrier, apparently. Anybody can catch this. If you bring it back, you could seriously affect your business and your livelihood in the private sector, because I think we're starting to read about where some production lines have been shut down and because of that. So, and what we do know is that if we social distance, if we just rearrange our trips, if we just think about this in the short term, that we can help fight this virus in the long term. City Hall is open. We are open for services. We encourage people to call. We encourage people to email. We have the capability to do FaceTime, to do video conferencing. We don't want to put our citizens at risk, and we don't want to put our employees at risk, but we are open for business until further notice. Communication's key. You will see us putting more communication on our website. Franklin County will pick up some of that. So if there's something we have not thought of, please let us know that we need to get out there. And as of today, we have nothing for the study session on Monday. I don't think we will, but I will let you know on as soon as I can if there's a decision to cancel that. And that's it, Commissioners. Thank you for showing up today. And I thank you. Any questions?
Questions for our city manager?
I do want to tell you this. Your staff, your employees are doing a great job to this. Our law enforcement, our first responders, our fire department, our police, a lot of people are on the front line. And they are looking to do some extra things out in the community to help the community through this. Think about your medical professionals who are doing the first screening, who are doing the treatment of our citizens, of perhaps any of us at some point. They are carrying a heavy burden, a necessary burden through this time of the COVID-19 virus, and you just need to tell them thank you. And wash your hands.
Thank you, City Manager Neinstedt. I appreciate your report. I am going to now turn it over to reports by city commissioners, and we're going to begin on my right. It's a new space for this particular commissioner who has been at this desk for many years, but has never sat at this end. So Commissioner Jorgensen.
Well, I have no report.
Oh, it took all the words out of your mouth sitting over that way.
Dusty?
Yes, see? Commissioner Crowley.
I have none either.
Commissioner Skidmore.
Well, I just want to
So-
add to the city manager's comments about the COVID-19 and recognizing that, you know, we can learn a lot from our history, whether it be in the business world, the political world, as well as the medical world. And I take you back to 1918 when the Spanish flu hit this country, and many, many people died. And in Kansas City, the city commission looked at closing a lot of bars and restaurants, and a lot of the business owners were very objective to that idea. And one of the commissioners said, it's very difficult to apologize to a dead man. And it's not quite that serious here yet, but it could be. And I think with going forward with our businesses that are suffering right now, it's much easier to apologize to them living than to apologize to a dead man. And I think we need to keep that in mind. Everybody in the community needs to work together, everybody from top to bottom. There's nobody, no exceptions. And so I think we're all going to be suffering from this, obviously, but we need to work together, and I think eventually we'll work through this. I do want to mention, too, quickly about we lost two wonderful Ottawans in this last week. Charles Gillette, who sat at this bench for many years, and Sarah very eloquently brought that up at our study session about his life as a public servant, as a volunteer. And if you've not read his obituary, it's online. You should read it. It's very exemplary man that he lived for all of us to follow. And also my father-in-law passed away, Dr. John Thornburg. He had been a dentist here in town for 40 years, from the early 50s up through the early 90s. He lived here in our community for the last year at Morningstar Care Homes, I should say award-winning Morningstar Care Homes. They did a tremendous job of taking care of him, along with the Good Shepherd Hospice people. So we'll miss both those valuable Ottawans, and we look forward to seeing people who will eventually replace and take over their positions in town. It's a challenge, but nonetheless, I know that we will miss them.
Well said. You're sorry for your loss.
Yeah, thanks.
Yesterday, I told my girls who had not really been out of the house since Friday of last week, I asked them if they wanted to go to a drive-through and pick up food. And you could have thought that I had given them a trip to Disney World. I mean, they were so excited. I have teenage girls who don't get excited about anything, and they were excited just to get in the car and go somewhere and go through drive-through and get food. And so it did make me think when Pastor Smith was talking about earlier about how everything it just makes you refocus on what's going on in the world. You know, much of what we're doing this for, actually not much, all of what we're doing, all of these prevention measures for, goes back to a statement that Benjamin Franklin made that says an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And if you take just a few steps now, hopefully we can stop anything from horrible happening in our community. So I hope that you take those words to heart and that you practice an ounce of prevention so that we won't need that pound of cure. We have actually limited things on our announcements coming up henceforward. We have canceled our monthly city, county, school board luncheon today. And as of now, our study session for Monday is on target to happen. However, look for that to possibly be canceled if there is no business that will be necessary to be taken. And I think that we will probably announce that in multiple forms.
Yeah, Commissioners, our deadline for items on the agenda is at 10 o'clock tomorrow. So we will know early, and we will get that word out.
As the city manager had indicated before, we are open for business here at City Hall. We certainly want you to reach out to any one of your commissioners or anybody at City Hall to let us know how we can how we can answer any questions you have or address any of your concerns that you may have. If there's nothing else to be brought forth to the Ottawa City Commission today, I will adjourn the meeting.